Now, I want to switch gears and focus on something else that we covered here on Law and Crime. Do you remember Jason Van Dyke? Do you remember him? He was found guilty of second-degree murder and multiple counts of aggravated battery in connection with the shooting death of Laquan McDonald. Well, he was found guilty, right? But we don't know what his sentence was. We believe he is going to be sentenced on January 18th. And one other thing to note, do you remember the police officers who were accused of covering up those crimes, those 3 officers? Well, what happened to them, right? That was a bench trial. The judge in that case didn't render a verdict. We believe she will render a verdict on January 17th. So this is very interesting, these 2 cases happening in that week. Pretty interesting, going to be a very interesting week here on Law and Crime. But we want to talk a little bit more about this case, and let's start with one of the biggest moments in this whole saga when Jason Van Dyke took the stand in his own defense. A good place to start as we analyze this upcoming case. Take a look. Well, all of Chicago and the world was watching that testimony. A lot at stake in that trial, and he was found guilty of murder and multiple counts of aggravated battery. Back here with Dan Schorr. Dan, we're talking about what to expect in his sentencing. It's a little strange, right? His attorneys seem to be pushing for probation. We don't know what the prosecution is going to push for, but remember, an aggravated battery conviction carries a sentence of 6 to 30 years in prison. Second degree carries 4 to 20 years in prison, and there has been a push to that he gets consecutive prison sentence for each of the 16 aggravated battery counts. What do you think is ultimately going to happen here?
Right. Well, the aggravated battery counts are for each bullet that went into the victim there. So there's talk that there should be consecutive time. I don't expect that, but I also don't expect probation. In a case like this, you'll usually have some kind of prison time. You don't really see murder cases where someone gets probation as a sentence. And because the shooting was one continuous act, you usually don't have consecutive sentences. Consecutive sentences more if someone killed multiple people or there were multiple dates where offenses occurred. But multiple gunshots, I understand why there'll be multiple charges, but usually you won't see consecutive time from that. So I would expect one state prison sentence or multiple state prison sentences that run concurrently, meaning he serves them all at the same time, but I would not expect probation here. Do
you think significant prison time? Again, this is a tough job for the judge because all the world is really going to be watching this, and we know Chicago is going to be watching this. What do you think the prison sentence would ultimately be?
Right, and the judge has to filter all that out. The judge can't let the public perception or the outrage of being too harsh or too lenient affect the judge's decision. That's really important. That's what judges are supposed to do. Just follow the law, follow the facts. And no matter what anyone thinks of the case, he was convicted by a jury of second-degree murder. That generally leads to some kind of significant prison time. Now, how long, it's really hard to say, but I expect something that is going to put him in prison for a number of years, not probation, but not consecutive sentences for all these gunshots.
What about the 3 officers who were on trial for allegedly covering it up? The judge in that case, because it's a bench trial, no jury, has yet to render a decision and keeps pushing it back, pushing it back, and pushing it back. We think January 17th is the day that she will make her ruling. What do you make of the fact that it keeps being pushed back?
It's interesting. If this wasn't a high-profile case, you wouldn't make that much of it because I've done bench trials, and bench trials, the judge has a lot more leniency about when to make a decision. It's not like a jury's done and you want them to give their verdict so the jury can go home. A judge can say, I'll render my decision in a month, in 2 months, and that happens a lot. In a high-profile case, usually the judges are less likely to do that because they're under scrutiny. So the fact that it's being delayed here, it's hard to understand exactly why that's happening, but it won't affect the ultimate decision by the judge.
It could be pressure. It could be also just the amount of materials that she has to go through because, again, one part of that case was a collection of so many emails trying to sort through whether or not there was a cover-up. I'll tell you what, though. Let's take a break. We're going to come back. We have a lot to talk about here on the network. Kevin Spacey, live trials. We have a lot. We'll be right back. Stay tuned here on Law and Crime. That was Jason Van Dyke taking the stand. Dan, was that a good idea for him to take the stand or not?
Well, first of all, he had to take the stand. In a case where he's accused of shooting somebody and he's going to argue that it was somewhat related to self-defense, that there was a threat, he has to explain that to the jury because no one else is going to be able to explain that. So this is the kind of case where you do have to testify. That being said, he comes across very evasive. There's a lot of direct questions asked of him, and he seems to keep saying he doesn't understand or he's not following the questions, and that certainly hurt him leading up to the verdict.
Do you think that the jury convicted him because he took the stand? How he did under the, I mean, saying that we're looking at that video, that it looks like a kind of a video game video, and he's saying, well, that's not my perspective. I'm scratching my head a little bit. How is that not your perspective?
Because it came from his expert,
right,
and it's the back of his head. Right, he's splitting hairs. He says it's not my perspective because you don't see it through my eyes. You see it from the back of my head.
And is the jury seeing that through that and being like, well, he's not telling the truth?
It doesn't seem like he's being forthright when he gives an answer like that. However, I think more important than that testimony is the other evidence in the case, that the victim here was shot 16 times, that there wasn't really an explanation of how there was a threat to him that needed this response.
Yeah, but it's good to recap what we saw in this case and what we can expect moving forward with his sentencing and ultimately the verdict in the police officers who are accused of covering up the crime. A lot at stake here in Chicago. Let's take a break. When we come back, we have a lot more to cover here on Law and Crime. Okay, welcome back, everybody. We have a feed that we want to bring to you right now in regards to the Kevin Spacey case. You know that today is supposed to be his arraignment on a felony charge of indecent assault and battery, and right now this is really interesting. This, we believe, is a car where Kevin Spacey is in, traveling to the courthouse. This is very interesting. We believe that he is in that car. Well, I was just talking with Dan Schorr about it. Dan, you mentioned this kind of looks like OJ, following him from this helicopter feed, again, we believe, on his way to his arraignment. What do you think's going on in Kevin Spacey's mind, with his team? What is this like in anticipation of an arraignment?
It's got to be nerve-wracking for him. He's had these accusations surfacing with this defendant, with this complainant and other people for a while, but now he's actually going to have to be in court for the first time facing formal charges. The other thing is his attorney tried to waive his appearance and submitted an affidavit from Spacey saying, I have to travel far, it's inconvenient, it's also going to lead to enhanced press coverage, which will bias a potential jury pool against me. And you can see from our coverage and other coverage that there is a lot of attention to him appearing in court. That coverage wouldn't be there if he didn't appear in court, but no judge is going to allow his appearance to be waived here.
Because Kevin Spacey, he's got the money to come to this courtroom. They don't feel too sympathetic for a celebrity figure like this.
And also, people are supposed to be there to appear and see what charges are against them. That's part of the formal process. You're not supposed to have someone do that on your behalf.
Good driver, just slowed down through that puddle, just a FYI. But here's an important point, talking about the actual contents of this crime. This is an interesting case, right? Because if you listen to the details of it, about happening in a bar, you have the victim here, this alleged victim, who said to Kevin Spacey he was 23 years old when he was really 18 years old. There's been a question about why didn't he leave if he was being groped, why didn't he just get up and leave? But the danger there is to victim blame. You're putting the impetus on the victim. I'm curious your thoughts here on trying to fairly analyze this case.
Sure. Well, there's definitely sexual assault cases where someone who's victimized stays in the situation. Either they're fearful, they don't know what to do, or they're shocked by the moment, they're frozen. That happens a lot at prosecuted rape cases where there's situations like that. So just because someone stays there doesn't mean there's not a real assault happening. That being said, it's a legitimate question to ask, why didn't you leave? Why didn't you move away? You're in a public place. You could have asked for help. Why were you texting and using social media when you could have told Kevin Spacey to stop or moved away? That doesn't mean that he wasn't sexually assaulted, but those are questions that will be asked. And when you have to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt that there was a lack of consent, that's part of the issue. So that's up to the prosecutors to show that. That's up to the complainant when he testifies to explain that. Why did I stay in that situation for a few minutes before leaving? It's going to be the issue of the case.
Wasn't the Snapchat video in question, too, because it's not clear, even if you look at it, if there is a sexual assault occurring, because maybe his hand was placed not under the pants, which was the allegation here, that he groped him, unzipped his pants, and touched him, but maybe the hand touched the shirt or the thigh. That would be a different kind of situation.
Right, and also, does the video show lack of consent? It doesn't really seem like that would show a lack of consent. It might corroborate the fact that there was touching, but does that mean that he was not consenting to the touching? Instead of moving, he was taking a video of it, according to the evidence. So that's a question that needs to be answered.
From a practical point of view, too, look, I don't know anything about the video, but Snapchat's short videos that, only last a few seconds. Can you prove a case one way or another based upon a short video?
You can't prove it with the video, but it can corroborate other proof that can then lead to a conviction. And other proof may be this complainant's account. If he gives a credible account and then that video corroborates it, that can be enough.
Now, okay, if you're just joining us, we believe this is a live feed of Kevin Spacey in that car driving to that Nantucket courtroom where he will face his arraignment. I'm back here with Dan Schorr. Dan, in terms of bail, bond, what's going to happen? Will he be released on his own recognizance? Can you explain to our viewers what's going to happen here? Will he go to there and be denied bail? I mean, what's going to happen?
Sure. You can either be released on your own recognizance, which means you just can leave and then you have to appear in court again. There can be some kind of bail set, so you have to put up a certain amount of money or a bond, and then you can get out. With Kevin Spacey, there's no amount of money that he wouldn't be able to meet since he's apparently a wealthy person. Or you can have a remand which says you have to appear in court. But the main reason for bail is to make sure the person's appearing in court again. He doesn't seem to be a flight risk. There's no evidence that he's a flight risk. He traveled far to get to court. There's no reason to think he wouldn't do that again. So it's unlikely to have a remand. They probably set some kind of bail that he'll be able to meet, and then he'll be out after that.
Practically what happens? Does the prosecution present their evidence here?
They'll give some kind of basic overview of the case, what the charges are. They're not going to run through all the evidence. You're not going to hear testimony. He'll either plead guilty or not guilty. Of course, he'll plead not guilty. And then there'll be a schedule set by the judge for the next stages, which may be we're going to have a conference in a few weeks, or we're going to set a motion schedule for you to file motions about evidence. Or some judges will even set a far-off trial date that they then work towards. So it'll be about scheduling and about formally telling him what he's charged with.
I'm curious to see if we're going to learn more details from the prosecution today. That, a lot of this is speculation and trying to grasp details of what we know, but hearing them speak in the courtroom about what evidence they have will be very interesting to see. Now, as we're watching this, we can't help but think that, what was it, a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, Kevin Spacey released that video right on the heels of this announcement that he was being formally charged. Do you think that was his way of saying to the public, listen, despite what happens in the legal system, let me speak to you directly. Give me a chance to speak to you, because he's not going to have that chance in the courtroom.
It's possible that he thought that, but it certainly didn't come off like that. If he wanted to do what you were saying, he would have done it not in character, but as himself, and said, look, I know you're hearing a lot of bad things about me, but the truth is very different from that, and I'm going to have a chance in court to explain that. But he didn't do that. It was kind of mocking the situation, undermining it, and certainly hurt him. I can't imagine it was a thoughtful decision by a team of advisors.
Well, when 1 minute you seem to be denying the accusations, or at least putting, question mark on it, and then saying, well, did you ever see my character die on, it seemed like a season 7 Netflix, House of Cards trailer. Very interesting, conflating these two ideas. But that video, if you were sitting as his attorney, and he calls you and he says, listen, I'm going to release this video of me as Frank Underwood in character, what would you say?
I would say absolutely not. I get whoever was close to the home to get there to seize him and make sure he doesn't release it, because it's hurting him.
Out. I mean, there was somebody operating the camera. It looked like cue cards were there. Somebody agreed to do this with him.
Someone, but look, he's a famous actor. I'm sure he has some supporters. He could get someone to film it. That's very easy these days, to get someone to record something. There's no way that a lawyer or a trained advisor advised him to do this or consented to this happening. It would be malpractice if that happened.
Yes, you might be right, but here's the curious thing. When you watch that video, he doesn't directly reference the Frank Underwood character when he clearly could have. That's interesting from a legal point of view, because he doesn't own the rights to the character. You sure he wasn't advised one way about, hey, if you're going to make this video, do this, don't do this?
It seems like an irrational act, so it's hard to then walk it back and say, what was he thinking? Because if you really want to present yourself the best to the public, you're not going to make something that makes light of the process and makes light of the charges against you when it's serious charges. The thoughtful answer for him would be, look, I take it really seriously what I'm being charged with. I'm not guilty. I'm going to show you that, but this kind of undermines the seriousness of the process. But look, imagine from his perspective, he's trying to figure out, what can I do? He's gone from this exalted celebrity to a pariah where his whole life has changed. It's got to be extremely difficult for him, now maybe deservedly so. And he's really trying to figure out, how can I present myself to the public in a way that's helpful? I don't think he got it right, but I think that's what he was trying to do.
But this is not his only problem, right? I mean, even if this case is moved, even if this case, let's say he's not convicted, let's say the charges are dropped, he still has other allegations against him, right? So when we look at this, it's not like we're just waiting for this one decision and it will dictate the rest of his life. He goes back to movies after this. His life is basically over in the entertainment industry, correct?
Unless there's some shocking revelation that everyone who's accused him has lied, which we don't expect, it's hard to imagine him ever doing anything in the entertainment industry again. But these charges are ultimately, from a criminal perspective, going to be seen in isolation from that. You're not going to hear at the criminal trial about these other accusations. So although that's a public perception problem, it's probably not his legal problem.
Okay, everybody, so this is a live feed. We believe Kevin Spacey headed to court. We're going to take a break. When we come back, who knows, maybe he'll still get there. We're going to cover it. We're going to cover everything that we can here on Law and Crime, so stay tuned. We'll be right back. Everybody, this seems to be a live feed outside of the courtroom in Nantucket, Massachusetts, where actor Kevin Spacey will be arraigned on indecent assault and battery. We were just following, before our last break, we were following his car headed towards the courthouse. I don't know if we still have the feed, but this appears to be a feed outside the courthouse. You can imagine the media circus that's happening right now. Everybody's waiting. Now, remember, we haven't seen Kevin Spacey in the flesh in about a year. That appears to be the inside of the courtroom right there. This is unbelievable. We're all waiting to see him. Back here with Dan Schorr, we're breaking it down. Dan, what a day watching this happen. And again, he is charged with indecent assault and battery. I'd like to just talk about what that definition is. It is the touching of the breasts, buttocks, or in this case, genitals, it's basically... It's fundamentally offensive to contemporary moral value. What does that mean?
There's going to have to be some lack of consent that's going to be part of that. You might have some indecent public exposure, but I don't think that's not what this case is about. It's ultimately going to be about touching without consent, and that's going to be the crux of this case. Can the complainants and the prosecution prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the touching occurred and that it was beyond a reasonable doubt? We just saw him walking into court. You're probably going to see the defense attorney make a motion to dismiss the case. That might happen here, and he'll go through why there's legally insufficient evidence in the complaint, and that'll be denied, and then we'll move on from there.
I mean, it's a pretty unbelievable day. We're watching Kevin Spacey walking into court facing a sexual assault charge, very serious, could face up to 5 years in prison if convicted. Do you think that's a real possibility here, again, if he's found guilty?
No, I don't think that's a real possibility because it's a first offense. He doesn't have a criminal record. Even though he's been accused by multiple people, and there's no criminal record of him being convicted for doing this kind of activity before. So he would not get the maximum sentence if he was convicted. But he is facing incarceration. He could certainly get some kind of jail sentence here.
Now, you said there's other accusations both here and abroad. What would happen if he's found guilty in relation to those other cases? Could other charges be brought? He be transported to another courtroom, both here or far, another country, facing charges? How does this actually work? Because if he's faced with charges across multiple jurisdictions by multiple people.
Sure, and we have that with other defendants where they're charged in multiple jurisdictions with everything from minor crimes to homicides, and they'll be in one courthouse and then they'll be transported to another courthouse. We have people who are convicted and are in prison and then brought to another state. It's more complicated if it's another country because then you need to deal with extradition treaties. But if he's charged in multiple places, he will face charges in multiple places in court.
Let's talk about the human element here, okay? So he is coming to court to be arraigned. Never had that happen before. What do you think is going on in his mind right now?
It's got to be, for him, this horrible moment where you were this rock star, movie star, exalted person, and now you're being brought into court and threatened with jail time for touching someone else without their consent. He has all these other accusations against him. He's become a public pariah, not only in the entertainment industry, but across society. So flashing back to his life a couple of years ago, it's a completely different world that he's existing in, and it's got to be very difficult. At the same time, he needs to stay composed in court. He needs to make sure he's addressing the charges in a respectful way, because the judge is going to make evidentiary rulings.
Speak, right? He will speak today?
Not necessarily. He may just say not guilty, but when he's asked for a plea, but sometimes the lawyer will do that on his behalf. Often the defense lawyer will say, on behalf of my client, I enter a plea of not guilty, and he'll make whatever motion. So we might not hear him speak here. But this judge is going, if the judge keeps the case for trial, sometimes it goes to a different judge, he'll be making important evidentiary rulings. So you want to stay on that judge's good side. So you have to act composed. Even if you're outraged about what you're being accused of, you have to go forward in a respectful way.
But how do the attorneys, the judge, even the court, how do they prepare for a day like this, the arraignment, and let alone a trial? This is so high profile. How do they even prepare for this?
Well, on the one hand, it's unusual to have a high-profile case like this, but on the other hand, it happens all the time. There are celebrities being prosecuted for different offenses. There are high-profile cases that don't involve celebrities but have gotten the attention of the public. So courthouses have protocols for this. They have extra security usually. They deal with crowd control. They deal with the media. This isn't something that's the first time it's ever happened. So maybe for this courthouse, they're not as experienced, but there are certainly standard proteocls. They'll be able to handle it, no problem.
It's a bit surreal. And there, I think, yes, I thought that was Kevin Spacey. My fault. Looked like Kevin Spacey. Here's the thing. It's pretty surreal watching him going to be in a courtroom. We're covering so many of these kinds of cases. We covered Bill Cosby, Harvey Weinstein. Where does this fall in, this movement that we see in today's day and age of people, having to answer for things that they might not have thought they would have ever answered for?
Right. Look, aside from just taking it more generally, we've reached this really important, great moment in society where people who have been victimized by sexual abuse, sometimes for years, now feel empowered to come forward and confront the people who have abused them. That is extremely important, and it's an incredible moment for America and the world. Now, this case has to be separated from all that because it's an accusation against one person, and the evidence has to rise and fall on what he is being accused of. And the challenge for his defense attorneys is trying to separate this from the wider movement. And I'm sure that'll be part of the argument to a jury, saying, look, you're hearing about a lot of abuse, sexual abuse in Hollywood, elsewhere, but for my client, in this one instance, he's not guilty, and here's why, and you need to not punish him for what other people have done. That's the defense side of it. From the prosecution side of it, they can't argue that it's part of a wider movement, but certainly the fact that he's being prosecuted, this might not have happened a few years ago.
Are you surprised that we saw a criminal charge being brought? Because so many times people throw away, oh, this should be charged, he should be thrown in jail. But he was actually charged. He's going to be in that courtroom for his arraignment today. Were you surprised when the news broke?
Well, look, there's no doubt that if this was a few years ago and the Me Too movement hadn't happened and there hadn't been all the other accusations and you just had this one accusation in isolation against the Kevin Spacey who hadn't been scandalized, these charges would not have been brought. That doesn't mean he's not guilty, and that doesn't mean he won't be convicted. But for a long time, a lot of people, especially powerful people, celebrities, that got away with sexual abuse and weren't brought to account for it. In this case, we don't know yet whether he's guilty or not. We haven't seen the evidence, but this would not have happened a few years ago.
You mentioned it so much, though, about the jury, right? How do you find a jury that's not biased, that hasn't, first of all, it's going to be impossible to find anybody that hasn't heard of Kevin Spacey or maybe even watched House of Cards, but how do you find a jury that's not biased and doesn't have an opinion one way or another, especially if they've seen that video? Because anybody who's seen that video, it's going to be really hard for you not to have an opinion of it.
Right. I think there's a misperception across society that a jury has to not know at all about a case, never have heard about the participants, and kind of like living in a cave for months, and then they could come out and be on the jury.
Right.
That's not how it has to be. The jurors have
I don't even think you want those kinds of jurors.
Right, and often people criticize the jury system, saying in a high-profile case you only have the most people who are totally ignorant of the facts serving on juries, but that's not true. In reality, the juror just has to promise that they will render their decision solely based on the evidence presented in court, not based on what they've heard outside, and that they will be fair to the prosecution and the defense. If the jurors can promise that and it's credible to the lawyers so they're not challenged, then they'll be on the jury, even if they've heard of Kevin Spacey, even if they've watched House of Cards, even if they've seen his video.
Okay, if you're just joining us, this is a live feed into that Nantucket courtroom. Kevin Spacey faces his arraignment on a a very serious charge of indecent assault and battery in relation to allegedly groping a young man back in 2016 in a Nantucket bar. We are waiting for Mr. Spacey to walk into that courtroom. Pretty surreal to watch this in real time, and we're all following it. We're all waiting to see what ultimately happens. But you had talked about it as well, the charge here, and not something to be taken lightly. Do you think that they could have charged him with something else, or is this the indecent assault and battery, again, carries with it 5 years in prison, but was there potential to charge him with something else as well?
Based on the facts as I understand them, I don't think they could have charged something higher. There's no accusation that he has used some kind of restraint on the complainant, used some force on him. There was live drinking allegedly involved in the incident, but it doesn't look like there was an intoxication assault where someone was so intoxicated they were unable to express their lack of consent. So this seems like the appropriate charge.
And if they don't find him guilty of this, or if he takes a plea deal, is there any way to get something lower than this? We talked about maybe it shows that he touched the shirt or touched the thigh. Is that criminal?
That would generally not be criminal. There's certain circumstances, such in New York, you have a forcible touching statute when you touch someone anywhere for degrading purposes, but it's usually related to some intimate area. If he took a plea, it would be more about what he's admitting to and what the sentence is, and is there something that he would feel comfortable with. If they gave him probation and he admitted to a minor, less serious kind of touching, maybe that would be a plea. But any kind of plea is going to give him a criminal record.
And let me ask you this, too. The idea here, we're waiting for him to come into this courtroom. We expect him to plead not guilty. Would you be surprised to see an audible and says, hey, wait, we struck a deal? I mean, these kinds of things happen last minute. We're all expecting one thing and something else could happen, right?
Yeah, it doesn't happen at arraignments, though, except for extremely unusual circumstances. It might happen when they're about to start trial and they reach a plea bargain, or there's some hearing and they reach a plea bargain, but you really don't see it at arraignments. I expect the charges to be presented here. He will either say he's not guilty or his lawyer will say it on his behalf. The lawyer may make a motion to dismiss the charges, saying even if the prosecution's case is exactly the way I lay it out, it still doesn't make out a crime. That may be an argument that's never going to fly, but they usually make that argument.
Can you just speak once more to our viewers who are just joining us about what will happen to him physically today after this arraignment in terms of bail, jail, released under his own recognizance? Can you explain that?
Sure. He'll be presented with the charges. He or his lawyer on his behalf will enter a plea of not guilty, and then there'll be a bail argument. The prosecution will ask for some kind of bail, either...
I want to let you know, I think this is a live feed into the courtroom. That is actor Kevin Spacey. This is a live feed into that courtroom being arraigned. As soon as we have some audio, we're going to jump into that courtroom, but this is incredible to watch right now. You're seeing him. Wow. Dan, we're all watching this right now. We're all studying every movement that he's making. What do you think is going through his mind right now?
It has to be a surreal moment, and maybe he's thinking back to what's happened in my life over the last 2 years. If the accusations are true, and if other accusations are true of other people he's heard over the years, then he's known about this activity for a long time, and he's being called to account.
Wow. We are waiting for the audio in this courtroom, and we'll jump live as soon as we have this. But this is a feed the world is watching. This is another moment in this just whole Me Too movement of people being brought now into the legal system. We have a live feed. Let's go in. We have audio.
Being removed from the courtroom. So by all means, sit and observe, but do not interrupt these proceedings. And with respect to the press, we have the pool cameras up here, and other members of the press.
Okay, wow. So just the first part of his arraignment back there with Dan Schorr. One thing to note that Kevin Spacey, his real name is Kevin Spacey Fowler. That's why you heard him call him Mr. Fowler. The judge said this. Now, what have we learned so far, Dan, about how this trial will ultimately move forward?
Well, this was an evidentiary argument because text messages are really important here. The complainant was allegedly texting his girlfriend while it was happening, and then the defense attorney is saying that there might be texts after, days after, months after, that exonerate his client or have relevant information. They were asking for what's called a hold, so that it wouldn't necessarily be turned over to the defense, but that no one could delete it, no one could erase it. And the judge, instead of saying that hold would be told present, would be for 6 months. And then there'll be litigation or arguments later about what will be turned over to the defense.
And the key word, exculpatory. They are pleading not guilty. They say that their client will be proven not guilty. That's a huge thing to say in this courtroom right here.
Right. It's important, but it's also a certainty that he's going to say he's not guilty. They're always going to start off. They're not going to walk into court and hedge on that. They want to come out strong. They want to, both from a bargaining position against the prosecution when they're arguing pleas, but also for people at home watching this who may be on the jury. They want people to see an attorney and a client who assert that he is not guilty.
Let's talk about Kevin Spacey. Okay, he's in the courtroom, dressed there, nodding to the judge. Demeanor's interesting. He seems to be smirking at one point. I'm curious the way he's handling himself in the courtroom right now.
Well, he's being respectful. You know, we're trying to read the tea leaves of his facial expressions, and it's hard to know. The emotions that he's going through, maybe well-deserved, have to be enormous and difficult. That he's gone from this exalted lifestyle to being a defendant in court, being accused of sex abuse, and how he's handling that. There's no textbook on how to handle that. How do you act in court where you're being accused of sex abuse and you're facing jail time? This has got to be a horrible moment for him. Again, maybe deservedly so. We'll see how the evidence comes out. But for the most part, he's being respectful. He's being quiet. He's being cordial. He's not interrupting people who are speaking. He's letting his lawyer speak to him. His lawyer is coming across very well because his lawyer is being reasonable with his arguments. He's saying, we're not asking excuse me, for evidence to be turned over now, but we want it to be held. And he agreed to that compromise. I think that's important going forward. So far, I think he's doing fine.
They're talking about next steps in this process, in this legal process. What are the next steps?
I expect a bail argument. They alluded to that before, where the prosecution will ask for some kind of bail, or they may ask for remand, which means there'll be no bail. He'll have to go to court. And then the defense will, of course, contest that.
I think there's some activity in the courtroom. We're just waiting for the audio to come back, and then we will see what's going to be happening here. Again, that's Kevin Spacey's arraignment right now. There's working some evidentiary issues out. He was just ordered to stay away from the alleged victim. He nodded and understood that. I think we might, as soon as we have audio, I want to jump back into that courtroom. And it appears that let's go back now. Okay, so that appears to be the end of his arraignment. Some things you might have missed. Scheduling is for March 4th. There was no objection to him not making that appearance. His appearance can be waived, but he must be available either on phone or otherwise, and the time is about 11 a.m. So what does this mean moving forward, Dan?
Well, so he'll be coming back in about 2 months, and he's not going to be held in jail. There's not going to be jail time prior to a verdict. And during that time, the prosecution and the defense will be talking about what evidence is going to be turned over, what kind of plea agreement might be made. In a case like this where there are text messages and where there is potential other evidence, you think the defense would want to see all that before making a plea agreement, because maybe that other text message series has helpful information, maybe it has hurtful information. You really want to know everything you can before making an agreement.
So here's the thing, though, exculpatory evidence, what would they be looking for? What would be that smoking gun that would say, hey, there's no charge. You should drop the charges right now.
Well, supposedly the complainant's texting his girlfriend, for instance, about Kevin Spacey touching him in an inappropriate way. So how he characterizes that in the text messages is really important to whether this is a non-consensual sexual assault. If he's joking about it, if he's making light of it, if he's saying that, anything positive about it or just dismissive of it, that's different than him saying, I'm being assaulted, I'm freaking out, I don't know what to do. That's more consistent with someone who's frozen and being sexually assaulted. So how does he characterize that? And then in the days and weeks later, if there are other messages about it, if he's reflecting on it, talking about it, oh, that was a really, good experience or bad experience or just something that was weird, or is he characterizing it as that was a horrible sexual assault? How is he communicating about it? In these cases, really in every case in the modern age, how people are communicating on text messages afterwards with the people in their lives sheds a lot of light on their viewpoint.
And it's both for the prosecution and the defense, right? They don't know everything the other side is holding, right? So that's when plea agreements happen in this time period. You talked about, again, scheduling for March 4th. That is a lot of time between now and then.
Right, and usually you're going to have a lot of time in a case like this because there's a lot of evidence. They have to get the messages from the carriers. They might not have all the text messages, so they have to get them first from whatever phone carrier. They want to look through them. They have to turn them over. They have to discuss them. There may be motions to either turn them over, there may be motions to dismiss. So this is all something that's going to take over. 2 months is a normal time for this.
I'll tell you what is appropriate time. We think Kevin Spacey is going to walk right out of that door from this Nantucket courtroom. just surreal, ladies and gentlemen, just surreal to see Kevin Spacey in this courtroom. It's the same thing when we saw Bill Cosby being convicted and sent off to prison. Same thing when Harvey Weinstein was brought in that courtroom. This is just another example of moments where you have to step back and be like, I can't believe what I'm watching. I think the last time I felt that was looking at the Kevin Spacey video on YouTube. I can't believe what I'm watching. Here's the thing, though. This is a very serious charge. What does he do now between now and March 4th? What does Kevin Spacey, the man, do? Not his attorneys, not his PR people. What does he do?
Regarding this case?
Yes.
You know, I guess he has to think about what his story is going to be or reflect on what happened. Remember, this was a few years ago, so in his mind, he has to try to piece together what did I remember from that? Maybe he communicated with other people about it. Maybe that communication is going to be relevant. So you really want to get everything together. And, you know, he just has to figure out, you know, he might have other liability, either civilly or criminally, from other accusations. So he has to figure out.
Yeah. Do you think his attorneys, if they haven't already, now they're going through all these other allegations? And, I mean, he might have separate counsel in respect to any other allegations that are happening, but do they go through these other patterns? I mean, what else do you think they're looking for? They're having honest conversations.
You certainly have to consider it, because if you're thinking of making a plea bargain, is that going to set the precedent for other people to say, oh, he's willing to plead guilty if we charge him, so let's charge him here, or let's sue him here to get a settlement, let's try to get money from him. So I do think you have to have that global viewpoint. You want to make sure that you're taking care of your clients. On the other hand, the facts of this case also have to dictate how he responds to this case. Is it something that he feels he can contest these charges, or is it something that he can't? And what's the prosecution offering?
But what does he do, you know, as a person? You tell me, when you have clients, they're waiting for these dates, he doesn't need to work. He can't work. Okay, he can't really work. He doesn't need the money. But what does he do on a day-to-day basis as he waits for March 4th?
Yeah, it's hard to know. I mean, you know, some people.
Okay, you know what, Dan, I think we're going to jump out of Kevin Spacey because we're getting an update that there is a live feed in the Jason Dalton case out of Kalamazoo, Michigan, the former Uber driver who's on charge for killing 6 people in a shooting spree. Let's go live into that courtroom right now. And welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. How can we not continue to talk about Kevin Spacey's arraignment today? The whole world was watching as he entered that courtroom in Nantucket, Massachusetts, to face that felony indecent assault and battery charge. It was mostly preliminary matters where the judge ordered him to stay away from his accuser, and also he was ordered to visit a probation officer before leaving court. There's also discussion about how some evidence will be handed over between the prosecution and the defense. I want to break down some of the aspects of this case right now, back with former sex crimes prosecutor and Law and Crime trial analyst Dan Schorr. What a morning it was watching this. And again, for all of our viewers just joining, he did not enter a plea. Were you surprised by that?
I was surprised by that, but it's not that significant in the long run, because usually there's a plea at the time of arraignment, but sometimes it's waived. Ultimately, he would have pled not guilty anyway, and then it would have moved on. So it didn't change how things developed. It was probably just a procedural move by either the court, maybe the defense requested it.
Now, some of it was preliminary stuff, procedural. You see it, stay away from the victim, the alleged victim. You know, you would see that. The interesting thing was the evidence, right? So his defense attorney said, hey, we want to make sure that all of this evidence, all of this data is preserved because it's exculpatory. It proves that our client is not guilty. I'm curious your thoughts about that.
Right, but the defense did not cite a reason for believing that, and the prosecution noted that. The prosecution said they're saying this might be exculpatory, meaning helpful to the defendant, but they didn't give a basis for that. But that's normal for the defense. The defense is saying there are all these text messages from the alleged victim to his girlfriend, maybe to other people, and it could be exculpatory. They want it preserved. They don't want it deleted. But they didn't say there's going to be a text message on this date showing that he's not guilty. But they're right. They want that information. They don't want it erased.
But that's not fair for the prosecution to say, because how does the defense know what those messages are without seeing them?
Right, but they're saying we have reason to think they might be exculpatory. They might not have a reason for actually saying that, but that's part of their motion. The prosecution will have to preserve 6 months of it now. The defense is right, though. You want all communication from the complainant, and the prosecution is going to want that also. The prosecution wants to know what was the complainant saying to his girlfriend or other people afterwards.
It's a long time between now and March 4th. Do you think a plea deal could be entered?
Unlikely it would happen by then, because first of all, you want to get all the messages. Both sides have to see them. They have to negotiate what's a possible plea. He's not in jail, so that means there's no rush to get a plea bargain. So this case could drag on for a long time, and then maybe you'll see a plea down the road. What is the prosecution willing to offer here? Because, first of all, they're not supposed to treat this case any differently because it's a celebrity. But on the other hand, excuse me, if they give a lenient plea bargain to Kevin Spacey, they're going to be criticized for, hey, someone's a rich, successful person, they get a better plea deal than someone who's a poor person. And so often in the high-profile cases, sometimes they may be tougher on the celebrities, but we'll see.
You said something earlier that's just stuck with me. If this was the one charge, the one case, it would have been a very different scenario for him and his career than it would have been if he hadn't been accused by, 30 other individuals, both here and abroad. Again, this was an earlier feed of Kevin Spacey walking out of that courtroom in Nantucket. So the idea is no matter what happens in this case, he still has other things that he has to face, other legal troubles. And it doesn't mean that whether he's found not guilty or the charges are dismissed, he goes back to working on House of Cards or making another movie.
Right. You can't imagine his career being resurrected after this, right? He's now seen by so many people as being accused of as being a sexual public. This is a problem for people he works with, that people are complaining about him in a widespread way. So this one case really isn't going to resurrect his career, but he is facing jail time. It's horrible to be a pariah, to lose your career. It's another step to actually be incarcerated and not have your freedom anymore, and that's what he's facing here. And maybe he'll face that with other cases, although he hasn't been criminally charged elsewhere.
I talked about it with Aiden earlier. It was the Golden Globes were last night. Weird to see that difference between this and here. Could you imagine if I said to you 2 years ago, we're going to cover trials and you're going to see Kevin Spacey in a courtroom being charged with sexual assault, you're going to see Harvey Weinstein in a courtroom, and Bill Cosby is going to be thrown in prison? I mean, would you have imagined this would have happened?
It's shocking, but I think we live in a world now where any person who's seen in life, they're successful, they're proud, they seem like a nice guy. We don't know what happens behind the scenes. And I started as a sex crimes prosecutor 20 years ago, and I saw successful people, not necessarily always celebrities, but doing really bad things behind the scenes, and sometimes they're held accountable. Now they're being held accountable more. But one thing we've learned as a society, that those of us who worked in this area knew for a long time, is that just because someone seems on the outside to be this nice, amicable, successful person, you don't know what they're doing behind the scenes. And often those people are using that image to prey on people who are powerless and can't stand up. Now we've reached this moment of reckoning where people are standing up, are bringing people in power to account, and that's really important.
You make a good point about people coming forward, because the alleged victim here is a young boy. We might have lived in the day and age where he would have felt uncomfortable coming forward with this allegation. And I've read reports about it where he said he felt tormented by people that knew him about what happened. They made fun of him about this Kevin Spacey incident. So we live in a day and age where he's able to come forward.
Right, and if this accusation had been brought a few years ago, and we hadn't had the Me Too movement, we hadn't had the accusations against Kevin Spacey, there's no way Kevin Spacey would have been arrested on these charges. That doesn't mean he's not guilty. I'm not saying he's not guilty, but just the way society was a few years ago, if you had one lone person accusing a successful actor of groping without this society-wide movement, without other accusations, the prosecutor's not going to demand Kevin Spacey fly in and be arraigned. We have changed as a society.
So what you're saying, if I understand correctly, is selecting a jury is going to be pretty tough, because you need to find not only about what they know about this case, but maybe you ask them questions about, what are your feelings about the Me Too movement? What are your feelings about Harvey Weinstein? Things like that, correct?
Right, and you need jurors who can say that they're not going to take that other information into consideration, that they will reach their verdict solely on the facts and the evidence that's presented in court and the law that the judge explains to them. So they can know about the Me Too movement. They can know about Kevin Spacey's other accusations. If someone says that they are going to not consider that, they're eligible to be a juror. The defense lawyer may still want to strike them because they don't believe that they're going to be unbiased. But that's legally all you need, someone to say, I can be fair, I can be impartial.
What do you think it's like being a juror on a potential Kevin Spacey case?
Yeah, it's interesting because more in the past, these celebrity high-profile cases, the jurors would be sequestered and they'd have to, sometimes for months, we saw in the OJ trial, stay in a hotel that was almost like a prison for them, and people did not, people did not want to do that. Now there's been a movement away from that because it was seen as excluding too many potential jurors, and now there may be a normal life during the trial. This probably won't be a long trial because there's not a ton of witnesses. Yeah, it's one incident on one day, but then the jurors during deliberations may be sequestered sequestered. But right, people are going to be, someone will not want the pressure of having to decide a high-profile case, and some may want it. Some may want to be a part of it, and that's the people you generally don't want on a jury, the people who really want that spotlight. You don't want them to be on the jury for that reason.
Yeah, and you talked about witnesses. Based upon what we know so far on the evidence, the witnesses, is this a strong case?
It's unclear. You have his testimony, what he said. Oh, you will have his testimony, what he might have said to his girlfriend, what that alleged video will show, and then what did other people in the club see. It's going to come down to consent. The question will be, if he was having this non-consensual experience with Kevin Spacey, why didn't he move? Why didn't he object more? Why didn't he try to get away? Sometimes real victims don't move away for a lot of reasons, so it doesn't mean it didn't happen, but it's a question. Can they prove beyond a reasonable doubt that there was a lack of consent here when he was staying there for a few minutes?
And you want to be careful about not victim blaming and
Absolutely.
questioning why that person didn't move away sooner and things like that.
Right.
But, you know, we're just going to wait and see. Now, Dan Schorr, thanks so much for coming on and talking a little bit more about it, because this is really, you broke it down perfectly today as we covered those live feeds. What an exciting day here on Law and Crime, covering a lot. I'm going to be signing off. Bob Bianchi is going to be signing in, and he's going to guide you through the next chapter of the day. But what a morning it's been. So I encourage everyone to stay tuned here on Law and Crime. We're going to be covering a lot. We'll be right back. Hey everyone, I'm Jesse Weber, and this is Legal News You Can Use. Today's topic, what happens if you don't pay your credit card bill? Let me just say, don't put yourself in this position, all right? It's not one you want to be in. First, the credit card company will start to contact you after your first missed payment, usually when you're 30 days late. Now you may think, oh, I'll just ignore them. Well, after 60 days without paying, your interest rate could skyrocket. I'm talking doubling or even almost tripling. You also probably have to pay a late fee, and your credit score could go down. So are we having fun now? Well, it gets worse. After 90 days of non-payment, the credit card company could terminate your account and then sell your debt to a collection agency. In some states, you could then be sued, which could result in a garnishing of your wages and or a lien placed on your bank accounts or property. I told you, not good. Here's a tip. If you're going to have trouble paying, get in front of this. Don't ignore the credit card company or debt collection agency. Communicate with them and be honest. You may be able to work out alternative payment plans, and in some cases, it may be wise to retain an attorney. Go to lawandcrime.com for more legal news you can use.
If you talk, they will hear you.
We all want our kids to grow up safe and healthy, so we show them how. And we tell them with honest conversations that let them know what we expect. Not just one time, but every chance we get. That's especially important when it comes to alcohol and other drugs. Kids not only need to know the dangers and how to avoid them, they need to hear it often from you. And when it comes to pain medications, opioids, they need to know that they should never be taken without a prescription and never shared with friends or family. It's dangerous and illegal. So talk with your kids and guide them through the challenges of growing up safe and healthy. Because when you talk, they hear you. For more information about talking with your kids about underage use of alcohol and other drugs, visit underagedrinking.samhsa.gov.
So talk, they hear you. You can do it if you try.
Can I go to the sleepover?
Lucy, I want you to promise me something. If there's any drinking, I want you to say, no thanks, not my thing.
Mom.
I promise you, your real friends won't care. Deal?
I promise, Mom.
They really do hear you.
Did you pack your toothbrush?
For tips on how to start the talk, visit underagedrinking.samhsa.gov. A public service message from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration.
A brain aneurysm can strike you when you least expect it, plunging your entire world into darkness. But if you know the warning signs, you're much more likely to survive. If you suddenly experience the worst headache of your life or sharp, sudden pain